As always, my name is Nick Hodges, and today I'm joined by two guests. The first is Ian Russell from Humans of History.
Hello, nice to
Yeah,
meet you.
nice to meet you too. And Ian wrote and researched the script for our Narco Season 3 review, and after many months of extensive research, it was only right that he join us here today as we speak to our second and very special guest, former DEA agent
Hmm.
Chris Feistl.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, how does everyone think the review went?
Um, Generally, I think we put on a pretty damn good show. Um, Seems
Yeah,
like everybody liked it.
yeah.
I think the feedback was pretty good. What
I
can you say?
thought I thought so too. It was probably it's a special review because it's the first time that we actually had a historical figure join us for the show. So yeah. So Chris, so recently I did a poll and asked the audience if they'd like to see a live stream with you, and the vast majority said they would. So I saved the most interesting questions from the comment section, and I'm going to read them out to you. And we may get some additional questions from the chat. Anyone watching, have a think about what you'd like to ask Chris about his experiences going after the Cali cartel. So sounds good, everyone?
Sounds
Great.
great. Let's get
Oh,
started.
oh, nice.
Hmm.
Okay. So the first question we have was about what was your quality of life like outside of work while living in Colombia? Like, were you able to go to bars, hike, date, or attend sports games?
Well, first we have to draw the distinction between, operating in Cali and operating in Bogota. While we were in Bogota, our quality of life was pretty good. We got to go out to restaurants, we got to go out to bars, we played golf on the weekends. We were able to move around. Bogota is a much larger city than Cali. There were probably about 8 million people when we were there. It had a huge embassy. There were a lot of international people that were there, a lot of American presence because of the big embassy. So it was much easier for us to get out and about and do things. Now, we were still under certain restrictions in Bogota. There were certain areas that we couldn't go to. There were certain areas we couldn't drive to. Most of our travel had to be by plane, obviously, because of the security. But when we were in Cali, it was completely different. We either were at the base and we couldn't leave without a police or military escort, or when we were in our safe houses, operating more unilaterally. We did go out and about to work, but we never went out to bars. We never socialized. We never dated. We never did any of that stuff. In Cali, it was just strictly keep your head down, go to work, move around at night where we had more cover. So the quality of life between the two cities was completely different.
Yeah. Ian, do you have a question?
Um, yeah. So you arrived in Bogota in '94, I believe, and
Correct.
yeah, so by that point, Escobar had gone down. You were assigned to Cali, or you were assigned to work on the Cali cartel, but at the start you couldn't actually go to Cali in person, right? You had to have special permission.
That's correct. And what happened was several months before I reported to Colombia, there were two other Hispanic agents who were assigned to work in Cali. And while they were there, of course, we know the sophistication of the Cali cartel. The cartel was surveilling them. They knew where they lived, they knew where they ate, they knew where they rented their cars. They pretty much knew everything about them. And one day they were able to snap a pretty good photograph of both of the agents. And this just shows you too how Cali operated, their mindset and how they went about things. They got the photograph, they gave it to one of their operatives. The operative came into the embassy and he showed the photo to some of the DEA agents and he said, "Look, here's a photograph of two people. We know they're DEA agents. We know they work in Cali. This photo was taken in Cali. We know where they live. We know where they eat. We know where they rent their cars. So it was more of an implied threat that the cartel could get to them at any time they wanted. So as a result of that, as you can imagine, with the US government, the bureaucracy, knee-jerk reaction, nobody could go to Cali, everything was shut down, and everybody had to, including myself and my partner Dave Mitchell, we had to investigate the Cali cartel from Bogota. So because of that implied threat, that was how they operated to try to discredit us. And they knew that once they showed that photograph, they knew that the DEA would suspend all travel to Cali. So yeah, so the excitement of getting to Colombia to investigate the cartel and go to Cali, we were completely shut down and told that we had to kind of investigate the cartel from Bogota.
Did you feel it was necessary for your safety?
No, not really. But again, the liability and the danger and everything, as it, and everything. I don't know if you agree with this, but everything is kind of where you sit, right? If you're an agent and you're on the ground, you don't think it's a big deal. Hey, it's that's not that big of a deal. They have a photo, so what? We can go and we can operate. But as a manager or as the ambassador, you look at it completely different. As hey, we can't let anything happen to any of the agents, so we're going to suspend the travel. It's too dangerous. So um, I didn't think it was necessary, but that was the decision that was made.
Yeah, okay. So I got another one, which was what was your day-to-day life in Colombia? Was it as intense as portrayed in the show, and or did you have like moments to kind of distress?
Again, that's an answer that depending on where we were.
Yeah.
So if we were back in Bogota for a week or a couple days, our day-to-day activities were completely different. We'd get up, we'd go into the embassy, we'd review teletypes that came in from all over the world. We'd talk to the different offices in the United States that had cases against the Cali cartel. We'd meet with our Colombian and police and military contacts. We'd debrief sources. We'd do a variety of different
Mm.
office things, catch up on our paperwork, which is the one thing they don't show you in Narcos, the amount of paperwork that we had to do and complete, which
Yeah.
was crazy. So uh, that was kind of the Bogota day-to-day activities. In Cali, again, it was completely different. When we were staying at the police base, early on, we would get up, we'd eat breakfast with the police, we'd go to the wire room, we'd review, intercepted pager traffic or radio communications from the days before. We'd coordinate with the police or the military regarding operations, raids that we were going to do that day. And, we would, we train with the police there at the base. Sometimes we'd play soccer with them on their pitch. But afterwards, once we got to the point where we realized that the police base was completely infiltrated and we started to work unilaterally and stayed in safe houses and stuff, then our day-to-day activities were much different. They were much more secretive. They were much more unilateral. We would make our, occasional trips to the police base, to the search block, just to coordinate and see what they had going on. But there we would do our own drive-bys, we would do our own surveillances during the day. And then at night was when we did most of our clandestine activity. We'd go out, we'd meet sources throughout the different parts of the city for hours, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. We'd meet one in the north part of the city, then we drive, we would do our surveillance detection routes back to the southern part of the city, talk to an asset there, then we go to the middle. So we were constantly out at night, talking to assets, trying to get information, and doing our more discreet or our more secretive surveillances.
Mm. Thank you. Ian, do you have a question?
Yeah, the photos of those two DEA agents who preceded you in Cali, that must have been one of those moments where you were like, okay, this is what we're up against. This is a crazy sophisticated organization. Could you explore that aspect of the Cali cartel and yeah, why they were called the Cali KGB by you guys? And
Sure.
any other moments maybe when you were like, yeah, wow, these guys are the real deal.
Um, and that reference that you speak of is portrayed in the first episode of Narcos season
Yeah.
3, where the two agents are, didn't exactly happen that way, but you more or less you get the idea of where they had their photos taken, and they were in the show they were removed from country, but in real life they just weren't allowed to go back to Cali anymore. But yeah, that was certainly a wake up call that as soon as we hit the ground, where it was right in your face. And as we went on, the Cali KGB was a name that the CIA came up with. And part of the reason was, as you said, their sophistication. So, early on in May of 1994, and I'll talk about this a little later too, I think, hopefully on some of the questions. The military search block, which was led by Carlos Velasquez, who gets absolutely no airtime or credit in Narcos, and is one of the guys that really made a difference early on in investigating the Cali cartel. They raided a place called Edificio Chris, which is a building owned by Chepe Santa Cruz. And during the raid, they found an IBM AS400 mainframe computer. And just the discovery of that computer at the time was, it sent shockwaves through the intelligence community in the US, because the computer was about 7 feet high, 4 feet wide, and had an incalculable amount of storage. And once the computer was able to get sent to the US and decrypted, and the codes broken, there was just this treasure trove of information found. That they found Cali's phone directory in the book. So, Nick, if you were suspected of you're being an informant, and you called the embassy or you called Medellin to coordinate with the Medellin cartel, they
Yeah.
would be able to punch your number in and crisscross the number and find out, hey, this guy's called, Medellin or the embassy 10 times. He's an informant. Boom, you were dead. They had the motor vehicle registration in this computer, where they could run a tag and find out who it belonged to if it came back to anybody associated to the Medellin cartel. The same thing. They were able to track, commercial airline flights. They had passenger manifests. They knew that when DEA and CIA aircraft were leaving, because they had the control towers wired. They had hundreds, if not thousands, of police, military, political corruption names, payments, all kind of stuff. So it was crazy, the amount of intelligence and the sophistication they had. They had the ability to wiretap 400 telephones through their contact at the phone company in Cali, which is unheard of. Governments at that time didn't have
Yeah.
that ability to wiretap that many phones. They had, by some estimates, 5,000 taxi drivers on the payroll, that all their job was to drive around. If anybody strange came into town, Americans, anybody, they would report back on that. They had the hotels wired. Anyway, so you get the picture. It was literally like operating behind the Berlin Wall in the Cold War. They had the city so locked down that nothing moved, nothing came in, nothing came out, and nothing moved inside without them pretty much knowing about it. So it was very difficult for us to, initially get anything done, because once we found the computer, though, we were very aware of the sophistication. So that was a big wake up call for us.
Was this corruption subtle in the slightest, or was it blatant, like everyday life?
It was very covert.
Yeah.
Why, while Pablo's and the Medellin cartel, their MO, for lack of a better word, was, violence, threats, intimidation, coercion, murder, where Cali's was the bribe, right? Money, buy everybody. And that proved just, probably more effective than killing all those people, because, while Medellin, or while the government was targeting Medellin for years, Cali was, under the radar, just, buying their people, building their infrastructure.
Mm.
What did the average person in like Colombia think of the Cali cartel? I know that they clearly hated the Medellin cartel. They wanted Pablo dead, but did they feel the kind of same reaction with Cali, the average person?
Well, I think Cali was, a pretty good propaganda machine, right? They
Yeah.
they they went about, and they portrayed themselves, right? They were the gentlemen of Cali. They were the godfathers of Cali. They were the ones that, at one point in the 70s and 80s, they were responsible for 40% of the economic development in Cali. So these guys were, contributing to the economy. Things were good. There was a lot of construction. There was a lot of jobs, and they didn't have the overt violence, right, that you continually saw with Medellin. They weren't blowing up planes. They weren't, assassinating presidential candidates like Galan. They weren't, killing Guillermo Cano in the street. So that wasn't associated to Cali, and Cali played on that, and that they were the nonviolent, they were businessmen. So the average person thought, hey, times are good, the economy's good. It was okay.
But in reality, they were violent, covertly.
They were
Um,
brutal,
they really
but
were.
they
You,
they went about it a different way. They went about it quietly. If I had a problem with you, most likely they would just make you disappear, that you never came home one day, and then the search was on, is where did he go? Did he travel? Did he run off with somebody, some other woman? And some of their tricks that they used were, and I'll just discuss this briefly, is that with Rodimus Trujillo, with even Patricia Palomari, which I hopefully we can talk about later.
Hmm.
After they killed them and made them disappear, they had operatives travel on their passports out of Colombia to other countries to show that when family members or investigators finally came calling, they were like, look, we had nothing to do with anything. Check the immigration. Immigration would show they left Colombia, they arrived at their destination. So if you're going to do any kind of search or checks or investigation, start it in the country where they went to.
Did they slip through just because they were lookalikes, or do you think they might have bribed immigration before they landed?
No, there's no doubt in my mind that they had contacts at the airports, which we know through
Yeah,
the IBM computer, that they were able to pay people and to get by DOS or immigration officials.
yeah. So,
what would you say was the most shocking thing that you saw out there during your time
Uh,
in Colombia?
the extent of the corruption, and just as we talked about, just the brutality of not only the Cali cartel, but in drug trafficking cartels, the guerrillas, the paramilitaries in general, the lack of, what's the word I'm looking for? The human life meant nothing to these
Mm,
people. There were, I think at the high point there were, 28 to 30,000 homicides or murders a year in
mm,
Colombia. And just like the disrespect for human life, the quality, or the amount of murders, just how they did it, and to get to them, it was just business. So I would just say the extent of the corruption and just the overall the brutality and the murders that went on was probably the most shocking thing that you would see. Wasn't one or two, it was thousands.
yeah.
mm.
Was there any moments during your time in Colombia that wasn't covered by Narcos that you wish they showed?
That's a good question. You know, I think the way that when they had Narcos set up, there were certain things about Cali that were in season one and two, which I would have liked to have seen everything kind of in one show. And one of the things I mean by that is that they condense everything into 6 months, which I thought was kind of a stretch. You were really limiting the amount of things that you could combine into 6 months, which of course it took us much longer
Yeah,
than that to actually, it's close to 3 years. But um, early on, how Cali got started in the early 70s, how they just took like complete control over the New York area, and they just inundated that New York market, and how cocaine just exploded onto the scene. I would like to have seen more about that, more with Chepe and Pacho in New York in the 70s and 80s when it got started. I would have liked to have seen too, just in season three, more of the conflict between Medellin and Cali. So the Medellin-Cali War lasted, 6 years, with, the bombing of the Monaco building, the attack on Pacho at
Yeah.
his finca. A lot of that I would have liked to have seen that more in season three. And then the main thing was, again, as we go back to Colonel Velasquez. Colonel Velasquez was, the head of the military search block in Cali. He was me and Dave, my partner. He was our first contact. He was our first partner in Cali, and he was the one that made a lot of the progress initially in Cali with the raid on the IBM computer, the raid on Palomari's office, which was a gold mine. That was all Colonel Velasquez, and he was bribed at least that I know of, like 3 separate times by the Cali cartel, and he turned each one of them down. He reported it to his superiors, and he continued on. And I don't think that he really gets enough credit for, what he did and what he established going after the Cali cartel in the early 1994.
Any
I,
chance you could go
sorry.
into Colonel
Yeah.
Velasquez's story with Dolly, the informant he had an affair with? Because it definitely inspired a few scenes in Narcos season 3, episode 2, with Salcedo bribing the health inspector. I think, yeah, just talking about his affair with Dolly, if you could, and yeah, what it led to, and because it's a pretty good testament to his character. And yeah, it is a shame, as you say, that he didn't make the cut.
Yeah. So Colonel Velasquez gets appointed to the head of the military search block in December of 1993. And early on, he begins to uh, have some success against Cali. He initiates several raids. He has the Godfathers kind of, a little bit jumpy because they weren't aware of who this guy was or what his deal was. And during that time, early on, he was able to develop an informant who was codenamed Dolly, who was kind of ran in the inner circles with a lot of elites in Cali, as well as some of the Rodriguez family members. And she was able to provide him with a lot of that information, which led to these raids, which led to the recovery of documents. And uh, so that they had that success early on. But what happened is, of course, just like with the police, there were corrupt elements within the military search block. They were ultimately able to identify who this Dolly was, and the cartel approached her and basically said, "Hey, if you want to live, you need to work for us and not Colonel Velasquez. And whatever he's paying you, we'll give you a monthly stipend that's much more." So it's a pretty easy decision for her to make. She went ahead and she started working with the Cali cartel. And during that time, they were able to determine that Colonel Velasquez had, some kind of relationship with her. She was able to lure him to a bar in Cali where the cartel took photographs of the two of them together in the bar in the restaurant. And then she was able to lure him back to a kind of like a seedy motel where, of all people, Jorge Salcedo was able to, wire and put video into the room and record the two of them while they were in the hotel room. And they waited for the proper time. Cali with their, just like the KGB with the blackmail. Later on, they were, a month or two later, they were able to send photographs and a copy of the videotape to Colonel Velasquez in Cali, and basically told him that, hey, this stuff is going to be made public if you don't resign.
How did you?
So,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to ask, like, how did you vet which, like, kind of search block officers you could work with? Because I imagine, like, on some raids, it would be a bit nerve-wracking not knowing who you could trust. Like, how did you go about that?
Well, I mean, we didn't trust anybody, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
but because, and let me make this point out. I mean, as much as we talk about how corrupt, Colombia was at the time, uh, there were a lot of hardworking, honest Colombian security officials, prosecutors, soldiers, police that wanted to do the right thing, that tried to do the right thing and did do the right thing and ultimately lost their lives doing it.
Yeah.
But, Cali, again, is how sophisticated they were. It only takes one person, right? So if you have this elite search block, whether it's police, military, wherever, and you have whatever, you can name the number, 25, 50, 100 people in there, it only takes one person that's in a key position that has access to critical information could subvert or sabotage any operation that you did. And Cali knew that. So they realized they only needed one, maybe two. Sometimes they had more, but that was it. So all the hardworking people that were there trying to do the right thing just took one to completely sabotage any operation. So, um, you know, early on, our first contact was with the military because the CIA had established contacts with them. But then, after the event with Dolly, the videotape became public. It was played on the news. We realized that Colonel Velasquez was, his time was coming to an end shortly. And even though he was, like I said, our most trusted contact, we started to gravitate more towards the police search block because we knew that Velasquez wouldn't be there much longer. So we started doing most of our work with the police search block because, again, the CIA had ties with the military.
Now, speaking of the CIA, was there any inter-service rivalry between the DEA and CIA that you
Well, there
witnessed?
was there was a huge rivalry just because, and remember, you got to put everything in context. In 1994, right? Pablo was dead. Communism had fell. Saddam was driven out of Kuwait. There weren't very many boogeymen left in the world, right? So the only thing really left, the only game in town was the Cali cartel. So the agency wanted to go all in on that because obviously it was in their backyard, and
Yeah.
they were the main thing. They were the biggest, national security threat to the U.S. So uh, yeah, they wanted in, and of course DEA. That was our mission to go after the Cali cartel. So yeah, we had rivalries. We had bets. We used to bet all the time who would catch the first Godfather. It was a friendly kind of rivalry. But uh, I mean, it's no secret that the Medellin or the CIA and DEA clashed a lot during Pablo's time when they were there. But my experience with my partner Dave with the CIA, we got along with them very good. They provided a lot of logistical support for us, safe houses, vehicles, a vetted Navy team that we ultimately used when we arrested Miguel. So I think it comes down to just like anything else, personalities, right? I was pretty easygoing. I got along with everybody. We played golf with some of the CIA guys. We hung out with them at Marine parties. So we got along with them very well. So we had a good rivalry, but it wasn't contentious. We got along much better, I think, in Cali than they did in Medellin.
Mm. I think before your meeting with Jorge Salcedo, um, yeah, you didn't. I mean, you didn't know how it would go down. You know about his experience. Um, yeah, speaking of CIA, I just remember an anecdote when you wanted one of your CIA contacts to accompany you, but the situation was so dangerous. He was like, "Nah, I'm not coming." Yeah, could you just talk about the lead up to that first meeting with Salcedo and yeah, how it went down for you?
So that was probably one of the most surreal things that we did when we were there. Just that meeting and the lead up to it with Salcedo was pretty crazy because we talked on the phone initially and we agreed to meet. First of all, we went back and forth. He told him like, look, Salcedo, we're here in Cali. Uh, we need to meet and we should probably meet as soon as possible. And he said, okay, fine. Let's meet out at CIAT, which was like a joint agricultural center. It was an hour from where we were. We were in the extreme southern end of Cali. This was in Palmira. So, and we didn't know a whole lot about Salcedo at the time. I mean, we knew he was recruited by the Cali cartel to help kill Escobar. We knew he was involved in the procurement of the 500-pound bombs in El Salvador. So, and we knew he was the head or the number two guy in the overall security for the Cali cartel. We knew he was a counterintelligence officer, an explosives expert, weapons, counter surveillance, you name it. So, of course, we're extremely cautious. We're leery. We're thinking it's a trap. Could we get kidnapped? Could we get killed? Could we get both? So everything was running through our minds. So when he said, "Can we meet at Siat?" I I almost shit my pants because I'm like, dude, that's an hour from where we're at. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of a sugarcane field. I'm like, no, I'm not going out there. He goes, I said, we need to meet somewhere closer to town, somewhere where we have more cover. And then he says something to the effect like, well, if we're seen together, it's not going to work out well for either one of us. So he just kept saying these things. It was like almost like saying like, dude, you shouldn't really come to this meeting because we don't know what to expect. So I was like, no. So finally I said, okay. But then he goes, no, you have to come alone. I go, I'm not coming alone. We don't go anywhere in Cali alone. We have to go. I have to bring my partner. And he said, okay, that's fine, but no Colombians. So this is where we really got to the indication about the corruption. He's like, no Colombians under any circumstances. If I see anybody who even looks Colombian, the deal's off. I'm gone. I want to see two Americans I can identify as being with the U.S. Embassy. I'm like, well, dude, that's not going to be a problem because when you see me and Dave, we're about as American as you can look. So we agreed to the meeting, and my partner Dave is like, dude, I can't believe you just agreed to that. We have no cover there. That's a horrible spot. It could be a trap, an ambush. And he was right. Of course, we knew that. So I said, well, we're going to leave now to get there. The meeting was at 3:00. Our call was at 9. So I said, if there's a trap, we're going to see it. We're going to be out there hours early. So we go back to the safe house. We get all our gear. We look like, for a movie reference, we look like Neo and Trinity when they went to rescue Morpheus at the government building. We had, bags and guns and weapons, but we had everything you could possibly imagine.
The teeth.
So when we get there, we're like, our friend Mike, the CIA guy, like, Mike, can you cover us? We need an extra gun. We need, we're going to meet. We didn't tell him who, obviously, because this was like, top secret. So we're going to meet some Cali Intel guy out by Siak. Can you cover us? And he's like, no, I'm not crazy. I'm not going out there. You're never going to get approval. I'm like, well, we're not going to ask for approval. We're just going to go. And he's like, no, you guys are crazy. I mean, it was much more dramatic with a lot more curse words than that. But he was like, no, you guys are crazy. I'm not going. So we basically ended up going on our own to meet Salcedo in the middle of this cane field. And in doing so, we violated every embassy, DEA, security directive that had been there. We weren't supposed to leave the base without an escort. We did. We weren't even supposed to leave the police base per the ambassador, which we did. We were meeting in the middle of nowhere, no backup, no cover, no security. So it was a very, very surreal meeting the first time we met with Salcedo.
Did you get disciplined for that later?
No, because we never really told anybody until much later, actually, where we met,
Yeah.
and who we met. So it was, we just kind of played it off as like, hey, we talked to this guy and this is what we got. So yeah, we never told anybody that.
I suppose they can't get angry with the results, with how you
Yeah.
got. Yeah.
And the other thing too is nobody knew we were meeting with Salcedo. We kind of kept that was a secret. We didn't, we didn't want anybody to know, we were meeting with such a high level operative. We signed him a code name, as we call him Sean, because he looked like Sean Connery. And we kind of just went about planning and doing everything with, hey, we just got access to this guy, and we didn't explain any of the details.
Yeah. Did you ever see him again after the investigation wrapped up?
I did. It's a good story. In about 2012, Bill Rimple wrote the book At the Devil's Table, which was, kind of what the Narcos producers and the writers used a lot of the stuff in that book. It was about Salcedo's life. And after the book came out, NPR National Public Radio called and asked me to come out and do an interview with them and talk about the time with Salcedo and the takedown of the Cali cartel. And when I got out, I traveled to some obscure location in California that they had picked. And when I got there, Salcedo was there also. So it was the first time I had seen him in 17 years. And, we got to do kind of like a joint interview and stuff. So that was pretty cool. And then I saw him again at like a special Q&A that the Narcos production team and the writers had at one of their offsites in California, during the making of season 3. And so I didn't know he was there. They just said, "Hey, can you come in for like a Q&A?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
So when I got in there, I saw him sitting there. So we did like a kind of a joint Q&A with
That's
with
really
the
cool.
Narcos production team, which was cool. And yeah, and the funny thing is with him too is I've had some other contact with him as far as after the takedown, where I'd get a call from like a block number or some like crazy obscure area code, who was calling, and it was
Yeah.
obviously some call wired through the WITSEC or Marshall's program, or I'd get a Christmas card, to the office where I worked at with no return address and stuff like that, or I'd get an email from some like one-time made-up email address. So I have had contact with him, but again, I have no idea where he's at, where he lives, what his name is, what his phone number, email is.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he reaches out, sometimes but it's been several years since probably 2017 was I think the last time I
Yeah.
talked to him.
Is he doing okay? Because like when Narcos season 3 ends, he looks pretty miserable as a mechanic.
That's true.
Yeah. As far as I know, I think he's doing okay. I know the one thing that has really nagged him was trying to get U.S. citizenship that he's worked on for years. I don't know the status of that, but I think everything else, as far as I know, he's doing okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah, in that first meeting, wow, sorry, sorry, I just got a chat of just saw the live stream and it destabilized me. Yeah, so in Narcos, yeah, you and Van Ness in the show, but Dave Mitchell in real life, you kind of mistrust Salcedo for obvious reasons, and Van Ness kind of clings on to that mistrust for longer than Chris Feistl in the show. I'm just wondering if that was the case in real life.
Well, I mean, Dave was always wound a little tight, so he was, as we both were, kind of suspicious of Salcedo initially. I mean, we weren't sure of his motives. We had to take, a lot of precautions. I remember a funny story is that as soon as, as soon as Salcedo sits in the car, Dave basically tells him, "If we try to get taken, you're going to die first." And Salcedo kind of looked around and he's like, "Dude, you guys need to relax." And I remember telling him, like, "We're not going to relax. You realize that we're out here by ourselves meeting you, head of security. So there's no way that we're going to be relaxed." And we kept looking over our shoulders the whole time because we just kept expecting somebody to come, whether it was, the cartel, whether it was corrupt police officials, somebody to try and come and either take us, arrest us, discredit us, what Cali did. We weren't sure what to expect. So I don't think it was as much distrust as they portray. It was more that we were extremely cautious. We were very security conscious, and we wanted to make sure that he was there for the right reasons, right? He wanted to cooperate with us. He wanted to get benefit for that cooperation. He wanted to get to the U.S. He wanted out of the cartel. So we needed to kind of establish that. So the first hour, that meeting was 3 hours, by the way. It was very long. We discussed a lot of stuff. And I think that first at least 30, 45 minutes, or maybe even an hour, it was more of like a feeling out kind of thing. Like, so not as mistrust, but more kind of like, hey, we need to be careful and make sure everybody's here for the right reason.
Mm. But by the
With
end of it, did you feel like you trusted him? You feel like yeah, like his information was solid, that he was the real deal? Because in the show, Van Ness keeps telling you like yeah, he's stringing us along and he's trying to set us up. Uh,
Well, by the end of the meeting, I mean, we knew, I mean, Dave too, he was a real deal, right? Because
it was like a 3 hour meeting, right?
it was a 3 hour meeting
Yeah.
and we were going back and forth with a lot of information. One of my practices I like to do when you talk to a lot of these higher level operatives is I always asked a lot of questions that I knew the answer to, right? So it was more of a vetting thing, right? What about this? Where's Miguel at now? We had intel that he was by the Cali Zoo anyway, and he told us he's by the Cali Zoo. We asked about a couple of other things. So everything that we were asking him was coming back what we knew to be true. It didn't say it was true, but what we had heard or what we knew. So as time went on, I was starting to feel like, look, this guy's been on the up and up so far. He's the real deal, and if he decides to fully cooperate with us, we're going to have the best chance possible to try and grab Miguel. So um, I would say by the end of the meeting, I mean, do you ever fully trust somebody that you first met like that, especially the counterintelligence officer, the head of security? Probably not, fully trusting him, but we realized that his info was good, and that's why you always take the precautions that you do, and that we did, just to make sure that, hey, while we trust you to a certain level, we're going to obviously take precautions to protect ourselves. So, um, and every time we did meet with him, even after that, we did our surveillance detection routes. We made sure we weren't being followed. We got there early. We checked the area. We did everything that we could to try to minimize any kind of, disaster or problem. So yeah, fully trust. Yeah, yeah. I don't know, not after the first meeting, but we were starting to get there.
Yeah.
hmm.
Before he flipped, did Salcedo ever block the DEA's activities like he does at the show?
Well, I'm sure he did. That was his job, right? So
Yeah.
his job was to protect his
Yeah.
boss, Miguel,
Yeah.
and the cartel. Yeah, here, perfect example just came to my mind, right? Um, he's reviewing calls because they had infiltrated Velasquez's office, right? They'd been able to plant a bug, right? Really, Cali
Right.
KGB, right? They were able to plant a listening device in the colonel, the head of the search block, the head of the Third Brigade, in his office so that they could monitor conversations that were going on. They also had wiretapped the phone. So they had heard Salcedo that the military was going to raid Palomari's office the next day. So he calls Palomari and tells him, hey, they're going to raid your office. You need to get out of there. You need to get out of there now. You need to take all the sensitive material with you. So before we had got to him, of course, his job was to prevent DEA, CIA, Colombian government, anybody from effectively launching any kind of raid against the Godfather. So yeah, he that was his job.
Hmm. Were there any others as high ranking as him who turned informant after he did?
Guillermo Palomari.
Of course, Palomari, but that was it.
No, there was other. Guillermo Palomari was the highest, ranking non-Colombian in the cartel. Um, we were able to get to one of Salcedo's security assistants, Enrique Sanchez, who's portrayed quite well in Narcos by a Colombian actor, Karel Ali Lasso. We were able to get to him, although the cartel killed him before we could actually
Yeah,
get him to the U.S. There were several others that, I mean, till this day, some of their cooperation has never been made public. So obviously, I can't reveal
of course.
any names there, but there were at least one or two others off the top of my head that were fairly high ranking, operatives, maybe not at the level of Salcedo or Palomari, but in the overall scheme of things had access to a lot of information. And part of the reason for that is we don't talk a lot about that in the show. I don't even think they cover it very much, is that in about March of 95, the Colombian government offered huge rewards for the arrest of not only the four Godfathers, but of the top seven Cali leaders. And those rewards ranged from, for Miguel and Gilberto, the equivalent of almost, give or take, $1.85 million to Chepe and Pacho, which was about $625,000. So there were these massive rewards for the arrest of the Godfathers, which brought about quite a few people who wanted to cooperate.
Ian?
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about the power structure of the Cali cartel? Kind of a little bit of information on the Godfathers and particularly the Rodriguez brothers. We'd be interested to know what the kind of division of labor was between them.
Good question. So the Cali cartel was founded in the early 70s by Gilberto Rodriguez, his brother Miguel Rodriguez, and Chepe Santa Cruz. And Gilberto was always he was like the visionary, the long range planner. He was the guy that said, like, hey, we have to get into cocaine. And then after cocaine was, we got to get this to the States. And they got it to New York, and then the New York market exploded. So Gilberto was always the guy that had the plan, had the vision, who's always, they call him the chess player, right? Because they always said he was 2 or 3 moves ahead. Although I would argue that should have been Salcedo's nickname, rather than Chepe or Gilberto's. But so he was the visionary. Miguel he was a micromanager. He was the guy that loved to get his hands dirty. He was the guy that was always, in the minutia of stuff. He was the guy that was, on the phone all the time with the U.S. drug cell heads, U.S. money laundering cell heads, the Mexican cartel leaders, the Italian mafia bosses, the Russians, the European crime family. So he was the guy he was the CEO, right? He was the CEO of Cocaine Inc. He was the guy that was running everything. And then you had Chepe, who was kind of his main thing was, establish the New York market and later on to establish other markets. So he was the guy that was pretty much, flooding or responsible for the markets in Houston, LA, California, Atlanta, Philly, Detroit. He was that guy. And then Pacho was, he joined Chepe in New York. He was running that New York market. He was laundering the money. And so that was kind of their breakdown. And the four of them, they got along well, and they gelled together. They rarely had disagreements.
So Gilberto was the main founder. I mean, I imagine Miguel was, active from the beginning, but I mean, he was calling the shots until his prison stint, right? I think he got arrested in Spain in 93, served 2 years and got extradited back to Colombia. And it was during that time that Miguel took over the day-to-day management of the cartel. And yeah, when Gilberto got out, he actually realized, well, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, I'm interested after he kind of, transferred the power over to Miguel. What was he doing while Miguel was running the day-to-day management?
So you're right for the most part, Terry. So in 1984, the Medellin cartel kills the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara, and there's a major offensive on against all the narcos in Colombia. So a lot of them flee to Panama. Gilberto flees to Panama initially, and then him and Jorge Ochoa go to Spain in 1984. A few months later, they get arrested, and 2 years later, they get extradited back to Colombia on these fabricated bullshit, bull smuggling charges and some other drug trafficking charge for Gilberto. So after 2 years, Gilberto, he kind of, as you correctly said, he kind of like takes a step back And those 2 years while he was in prison in Spain, Miguel obviously stepped up and was running everything. And he did a great job, obviously. And he was involved again as a micromanager, involved in every little detail. So when Gilberto comes back from Spain, he sees that Miguel has obviously a very good handle on things. Things are running smoothly. So he kind of just, let's just continue with business as usual.
Because he was a
Where
banker as well, right?
Yeah, as exactly as Miguel was handling everything. But make no mistake, there were no decisions that were made anywhere without Gilberto and Miguel and the other Godfathers weighing in and chiming in. But just because Gilberto wasn't the guy that was running everything at that time, he was still actively involved again in planning, in the corruption of officials, with strategizing, with establishing, new routes or stuff. But Miguel was the guy basically getting his hands dirty.
Hmm. Okay.
Did you request the Cali cartel or before when you were assigned, or did you know who they were before you came to Colombia?
Yeah, I had done, before I came to Colombia, I worked in Miami for 6 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, as you can imagine, Miami was the gateway for, Colombian cocaine and the cartels. So pretty much, not every case, but a lot of the cases we did had roots or traced back to Colombia, which was one of the reasons that I got there. And so you had cases involving, operatives or affiliated members of both the Medellin and Cali cartels. So during those investigations, I did a lot of maritime transportation smuggling cases. So, during that time, we had a pretty good background on who the players in the Cali cartel were, who their operatives were, who the cell heads were. So, yeah, we had a decent understanding of exactly who they were prior to going to Colombia.
Yeah. But I imagine there were a lot of agents who would love to have sunk their teeth into going after the big players. Like, how did you get around that?
How did I get to that point?
Like, how did you get that assignment?
Well, like I said, being in Miami,
Yeah.
working on cases affiliated to the Cali and the Medellin cartel. Uh, because of those cases too, you travel a lot, right? So we were traveling a lot into South America, into Central America. In those cases, we coordinated very frequently with the agents and the office in Bogota, just because we needed, information about, phone numbers, different operatives. So we had kind of had that rapport, and we had a conversation and investigative ties to Colombia. So that played a part in it too. Um, plus with the travel, we spoke a little bit of Spanish while we were there. So all of that for me, like I remember when I was in the academy, I said, well, if I want to be a DEA agent, there's only one place for me to go. I got to go to Miami, right? It's Miami Vice, the Cocaine Cowboys. I mean, that was the place to be. Um, so after being there 6 years and working on those Cali targets, and read an article by Elaine Shannon. It was in that Time magazine, the Kings of Coke. And reading that, I was like, man, these guys are really, if I want to be a real DEA agent, I got to go to Colombia and I got to go investigate either Pablo in the Medellin cartel or the Cali cartel. So I applied to Colombia. And when I got selected, Escobar was still alive. But by the time I had, went to language school and got to Colombia, Pablo was dead. And because of some of the work I did on Cali, it just made that logical assignment, that progression for me to be assigned to Cali and to work against the Cali cartel.
That's really cool.
Was was there any disappointment? I mean, I
I'm not
don't want to
going
say
after Escobar.
disappointment. Yeah, I mean, getting into Colombia and Escobar already getting nabbed, and at that point the Cali cartel isn't a national focus. Like people don't know how big it is. Was there a little bit of disappointment?
Well, at least he arrested them. Escobar died, so that's what a cop really wants to do, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the
I
thing
mean, I
was
mean when
though,
you arrived in Colombia, was it just like, oh, I came to get Escobar?
Mm.
no, because no, not at all. Because the thing was is that, you know, remember Pablo. Let me make sure I get my dates right here. Pablo was he surrendered in 91, right? In mid 91, he escapes in mid 92. So from mid 92 until December 93, it's a manhunt at that point, right? It's there's really no investigation going on with Pablo. It's either arrest him or he's going to get killed. So a lot of people in the intelligence community and us in DEA, maybe not to the average person, realize that look, Pablo's not going to be around forever. The next step in this, and everybody knew, again, in law enforcement was the Cali cartel. The Cali cartel, if they're going to take over, they've already taken over, right? They were already inundating the United States with cocaine because Pablo was in jail, he was on the run, he was a shell of what he was, back in the early and even the late 80s by that point. So Cali, all the coke that was coming into Miami, into New York, everywhere, it was Cali related. So we all knew that that was the next step, that we were going to go out to Cali. So I was actually excited, like, hey, they're telling us that we're probably going to go work against the Cali cartel. I'm good with that because we can get in on the ground floor and we can start working there. So it was, kind of what I wanted to do anyway, because I was more familiar with the Cali cartel than I was with the Medellin cartel.
In Narcos, there's another pair of DEA agents there's a pair of DEA agents that were working with you in real life that weren't shown in Narcos. Could you tell us a little bit more about this pair, and did they did they come at the same time as you? Did they make the
So,
travel from Bogota to Cali? I mean,
so it's a good question. Pedro Pascal, who plays Javier Pena, who wasn't really involved in the investigation of the Cali cartel, he left. Um, he actually picked me up at the airport when I got to Colombia, but he left very shortly after I did, and it was right around the same time that Joe Toff left. So um, he is a hybrid combination of Joe Toft and who was my immediate supervisor when I got there, Ruben Prieto. So he plays kind of that dual character. Jerry Salome was another agent that was there. Jerry and Ruben had been there for years before. Ruben had worked on Medellin. We worked with Jerry in Miami for several years before he went to Colombia. So he got to Colombia about a year before we did and was working mainly on Medellin too. But when me and Dave get to Cali, we are the only two assigned to Cali. We're the ones that are going to Cali. We're the ones investigating Cali. But as time goes on, we realize on a lot of these operations that we're going to need additional help, right? So Ruben develops a source. This is kind of long, and I'll try to make it as compressed as I can. Ruben develops a source into Gilberto. So Ruben, Jerry, myself, and Dave, we go to Cali and we do this operation to try to get Gilberto. So Ruben and Jerry would come to Cali when there were kind of major operations that we needed to do. Otherwise, they were usually back in Bogota doing, other stuff. Once after we arrested Gilberto, Jerry started to come to Cali a little bit more, although he never met Salcedo. He never dealt with him, but he did assist us in a lot of the operations that we did, just because we needed additional help. So at that point, there were, the four of us were mainly working there.
Okay. Nick?
Oh, sorry. I was asking why was Van Ness's name, Dave Mitchell's name changed in the show? Forgot to ask that.
Because during the filming of the show, Dave was still an active duty member in the DEA, so they weren't allowed to use his real name because he was still working. Dave didn't retire from DEA until I think like 2021,
Yeah.
give or take 2022. So anytime there's somebody still working with the government, they'll change their name.
Oh, I bet that kills him.
And
It
and
did.
question.
Yeah.
That's a funny story, and that's how we got to the point. Just to get
Yeah.
off track a little bit, but that's how we got to the point of trying to write the book that we're writing because um, he wasn't able to participate in Narcos. He wasn't able to do some of the Discovery Channel TV show I did, or some of the other podcasts and stuff with Netflix, Narco Wars. So he was like, "Hey man," he goes, "You're doing this stuff. I mean, I just retired. We got to do something together." So that's when we agreed to to try and write the book and talk about our time in Cali.
Well, at least he got shown in the show. I mean, Jerry Salome and Ruben Prieto didn't make the cut.
Yeah, but Dave was
How did Jerry Salome react to that?
in for I'm sorry for how did he react
Yeah, I
to
mean,
what?
was at any point was he like, man, I wish I'd been in the show. I mean, I imagine they went with you guys because you had Salcedo as your contact, right? I imagine that was the main reason.
Well, that and because we were the main guys that were in Cali like all the time, that were going
Mhm.
back and forth. Remember, Jerry and Ruben was a supervisor. He was back in Colombia running a group. Jerry was assigned to a different group to work on Medellin and some other intelligence projects. So me and Dave, our job was, we were in Cali, all the time. We were the ones with the police base. We were with the military. We were traveling there all the time. We were staying there all the time. So. Uh, it was because of that we had the contacts there. So again, they would come over for certain operations, but it was mainly us two on the ground.
Mm, okay.
Where did the name Van Ness come from? Was that like
They
yeah.
they just made it up.
Okay.
Hmm.
Like they always try, okay, so they'll try to get the first initial,
Yeah.
right? So Dave, Daniel,
Yeah.
Van Ness, Mitchell, two syllables. So they'll try and get something comparable or that's,
Mm.
kind of similar, but yeah, Dave wanted to certainly participate in that, but again, he was still working. He couldn't.
Okay. So you collaborated together for your book, like that's him telling his story now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's both of us, telling kind of the same story, but
Yeah.
at least something that he's definitely involved in, and he certainly wanted to participate in. So it was after he retired, that was his goal to kind of do something
Mm.
like that. So
Yeah. Did he remember anything that you forgot, like when you started working together on this book?
yeah, he remembered a lot. That Dave was very, in this respect, he was kind of like Miguel. Dave was like very, very methodical. He kept a journal. He wrote down notes, like almost like a diary. I was always busy, like running around and doing this and doing, and Dave would just sit there and today we did this and we talked to Salcedo and we went here, we rated this, we did that. So he had a lot of the really good notes that I would draft something up and he would say, well, what about this? What about that? I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't even remember that. He goes, well, I went to my calendar and it says that we did this. And I was like, man. So he was extremely helpful with because remember, we're going back 25, 30 years ago on some of this stuff, and it's you forget certain details, and so he was extremely helpful with a lot of that stuff. Sometimes I wrote something that I thought was different, and he's like, "No, that's not right. It's this way." I'm like, "Okay," so we went there. So yeah, it was a big help with that.
Yeah, I'm impressed he still has it. You know, things can get
Yeah.
lost over 20 years.
Well, knowing him, I'm not because I
Yeah.
knew he would have that stuff. He
Yeah.
has, and I have some too. We still have some, our notes and
Yeah.
photographs and certain, memos and reports that we had. So, between me and him, we were able to reconstruct a lot of that stuff.
Did you remember him writing it down back then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I said, "Hey, I'm going to have to rely on you and your trusty calendar book to get some of this stuff."
Nice.
Yeah, you guys were I mean you were talking about your rule breaking. You were quite the duo. were there any times that you bribed any Colombian policemen?
Wow, that's a great question. And yeah, the answer to your question is yes. There
Okay.
were
Is that allowed?
well, I mean, once you hear the
The
story, you're
ends
going to see
justify
it.
the means.
It had to be allowed.
Hmm.
That it we did it once or twice on a very small level, which was pretty insignificant. But the one major time that we did is so. Let's see how I can preface this. So after the first failed raid against Miguel, we go back to Bogota. We basically got our ass kicked by the ambassador we got arrested by inside the Santa Rita apartment. We got written up by the prosecutor. We were forced to leave the building. We went back to Bogota. The ambassador threatened to throw us out of the country. Fortunately, the police had gone back in. They had found the Caleta that was destroyed, and basically there was a lot of evidence there that Miguel was basically behind the wall, and we were right. So that was the only thing that saved us from not getting, our tours curtailed. So, but after that, there was a period of several days where we didn't hear from Salcedo, and obviously we thought the worst. We thought he might be dead. And, a couple of days later, he established contact with us, and he told us that Miguel had moved. He was in a new apartment in a new building. He didn't know exactly where, but he was trying to gather some additional intelligence. So about a week or so goes by, and now we're incrementally getting more details, more information. So we were able to determine that through Salcedo, there's two possible buildings. So we get to the point, make a long story short, where we get enough information where we go, okay, we can go back to Cali. Let's go back and try to find Miguel for a second time. The day we get back there, we meet super brief at a park, and I give Salcedo a phone. I give him a pager, a burner phone, and he gives us a few details, and he says, meet me out by Ciat tonight, and we'll go over a lot more in detail. It was a very quick passing meeting, just to relay the message and to give him the new phone and pager.
That was where you first
So,
met.
right. So we go back out to the cane field that night, and we're in the car. He brings us these photographs of these two buildings. He tells us a point where we can surveil the buildings, and we're going over all these details. And we have these photographs, these 8 by 10. They look like terrorist photos, right, of buildings. Hand drawn maps is this gold mine of information. So as we're sitting in the car, we see like police vehicles drive by. We're way back off a gravel road in a sugarcane field, but there's a main thoroughfare, maybe, I don't know, half a mile away from us, and it's dark, it's pitch black, but we can see the lights go by. And then we see a couple taxis zoom by, and then another police car. And we go, oh, dude, we got to get out of here. Time to go. So as we're getting ready to leave, a police vehicle, a van, turns down the gravel road and stops. And from what I could tell, it's like it sees our vehicles, and they're trying to figure out what to do. So we get out of the car. We take our guns, we throw them into the cane field. We take our phones, everything that we have, we throw them into the sugar cane field. And I put the photographs under the seat, and we get out of the car because we figured we'd have more time to react if they ever did come down. Sure enough, the police vehicle comes down. Two cops get out. They have Uzis. They point them at us, and we're like, dude, relax, So they're interrogated. What are you guys doing here? Why are you here? And we're like, we work at Ciat, which was our cover story, right? We had these undercover identities. Dave and I were German agriculturalists assigned to work at this international research facility
I
called
see.
Ciat.
Wait, German? Did they hear the accent or anything?
They were Colombians. They didn't, they couldn't.
Right. Oh, fair enough.
But they didn't speak English, so we would speak Spanish. But we had fake IDs and Colombian names. We had fake driver's license. We had Ciat credentials. We had now if they spoke German, we might have had a problem. But
Right.
so we're just work at Ciat. Do you have any identification? No, we left it at the office. Of course, it was in the sugarcane field along with everything else we had. What are you doing here? Well, we're just meeting with our friend who was Salcedo after work, and it didn't go over very well. They weren't buying it. And finally, they kept asking us, "Why are you here? What are you doing?" Then he tells us, of course, as luck would have it, that a taxi driver got robbed and that his vehicle got stolen, which was why we saw the police traffic there. So they were investigating that. So since we didn't have a real good reason why we were there, they told us, "Look, you're going to have to come down to the police station, and we're going to have to file a report."
Well,
And so there was no way that we were leaving that cane field, no matter what happened with the police, because we didn't know if the story was true. We didn't know if they worked for the cartel. We don't know if we were compromised. They found out about Salcedo, and then you talk about Camarena, Kiki Camarena, what happened to him in Mexico. So there was no way we were, leaving that cane field. So anyway, to make a long story short, they want to search the vehicle. They searched the vehicle, but I kind of steer the guy away from under the seat, because if they found those photos, that would have indicated that we were either terrorists or we were with DEA, and we couldn't identify ourselves obviously as DEA because we couldn't compromise Salcedo. So as they were getting ready to take us down to the police station, Dave reached into his pocket. He gave Salcedo this big wad of cash, of Colombian pesos. And Salcedo offered it to the police officers, and they went and they huddled around a little bit, and they came back and they said, no, we're not taking the money. And I said, "Well, hey, we're not doing anything wrong. Just take the money and leave us alone." And then the cop said to me, "Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, why are you trying to give me money?" And I was like, damn, that's a good question. I didn't even have an answer for it at that point. So they were getting ready to take us, and we were going to shift to Plan B, which I'm not even going to discuss what Plan B was here. But Salcedo made one final offer to the cops again, and he said, "Look, please just leave us alone. We're gay. Take the money and leave us alone. We're just out here. We have nowhere else to go," pretty much. And the cops kind of looked at each other. They were like surprised that that's not what they were expecting to hear. So they finally took the money and they let us go. But it was the equivalent of, well, it was $300 back then, but it's probably, with inflation and the peso and everything, it's probably about $2,000 today. So, yeah, we were able to bribe our way out of that situation.
You think they bought that story?
Yeah, I did, because I used to have long hair, and even Salcedo, they were laughing at me. They're like, "Hey, you noticed that the guy looked at you the longest, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, right." So you have a good laugh at my expense. But yeah, I think that they did buy it.
Okay. That's a good story.
Yeah, no, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And
Fortunately,
yeah,
it worked.
the
Now,
stakes were enormous,
final
right?
thing. Fortunately, that worked out. Salcedo's identity wasn't compromised. If we got taken to the police station, it would have been certainly after they found out who he was. And that was actually 5 days before we actually did the raid where we captured Miguel. So that was a very key meeting. We came up with a lot of good strategy on, how to get to the building, how to approach it, how to attack it. We came up with a good game plan. So it was a very important meeting.
Mm.
If you had been arrested, would that ended your involvement in Cali? Like, would they had to pull you out immediately?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. Certainly, they would have found out who Salcedo was ultimately, and he would have been killed.
Yeah.
So whether we would have been taken out at that point, I don't know, but we would have certainly been starting over from scratch. That's for sure.
Yeah. Do you have another question, Ian?
Yeah, in Narcos, which actor do you think interpreted the character most realistically?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many of them too, though. Um, let's see. Francisco Dennis, who's a Venezuelan actor who played Miguel, I thought was
Terrifying.
perfect. I mean, he nailed his mannerisms, how he spoke, his attitude, his personality, how direct he was, how serious he was. He was phenomenal. Pepe Rapazote, who's a Portuguese actor who played Chepe Santa Cruz, again, great, right? Completely different character, much more affable, likable, funny, joking around. Um, some of the scenes that, in the barber shop and just a phenomenal job. Who else? Oh, Matthias Varela, who plays a Swedish actor who plays Salcedo, did a really good job. You know, Same thing, kind of nailed his mannerisms and stuff. Really, really good. And the other, obvious Alberto Aman,
Yeah.
who I think is like, he's like a Spanish Argentinian actor who played Pacho. Um,
Mm.
I mean, his portrayal of Pacho is just great. Again, mannerisms, his kind of quiet demeanor, his outfits, great. I mean, Netflix did a great job in casting everybody for those jobs. And there was a lot of other good, Arturo Castro, who plays David Rodriguez, did a good job. The guy, Carell, who does Enrique, did a good job. They all were like, well, I mean, goes without saying that Pedro Pascal, you know, uh, did a great job too. But yeah, very, very good casting on their part for those characters.
Did the actors ever get like a dialect coach to try to learn like what a Cali accent sounded like? Did you ever pick that up?
Um, I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
I know that the guy who plays me, Michael Stahl David,
Yeah.
I met with him many times, and he tried to kind of talk the way that I did and pick up on the dialect and words and stuff. So I'm sure that they certainly tried to do that. But again, with Francisco, who plays Miguel, he was, and
Mm.
again, they're from different parts of the world, so you can tell they're obviously not Colombian accents, and you can pick up
Yeah.
on that on certain words. But um, I think they try to do that, but it's a little bit more difficult than it sounds.
Yeah.
So you were there for the decisive raid on Miguel. I think it was August 1995. Can you um can you tell us Miguel's reaction when he got caught, and maybe just go into the lead up?
Well, that's a very complicated raid. There were a lot of moving parts, and um, how again how we had to, you know, I mean, just to tell you some of the stuff. One, we told General Serrano that we respectfully asked him not to travel to Cali for the operation because we knew that the cartel was, monitoring his movement. And anytime that he traveled to Cali, there's some other details that I don't want to get into about that, but um, anytime he traveled to Cali, they knew that there was a major operation going underway. So we had to try to get him to stay in Cali or in Bogota, not travel to Cali. Right. So here are the Americans telling the head of the Colombian National Police, please don't travel to Cali. And he was like, hey, I get it. I understand perfectly. So uh, that was an initial problem. We handpicked our prosecutor because of all the problems that we ran into on the Santa Rita raid where we got shut down and we got arrested.
What happened to the
Um,
prosecutor, the failed raid? Like once you were vindicated, like did anything
Nothing.
happen? Nothing?
Nope.
Oh,
No,
okay.
because they fell back on the fact that we were conducting a unilateral operation and damaging the property, which we were.
Yeah.
So that his fallback was that. And so nothing ever happened.
Okay.
We had to pretty much lie to the troops on how we got them to Bogota, where we were going. We told them we were doing a different kind of raid, and we weren't going after Miguel. We didn't tell them that. We didn't tell them who the target was. They had no idea where the route of approach was. Only me and Dave knew that. Um, it was, very secretive as best as we could do it without telling anybody in the Colombian government what we were doing. And the raid involved a very like a commando style operation down a mountain, which was turned out to be a disaster because a lot of the raiding party didn't wasn't able to make it to the to the target. And there's a lot of details I'm omitting, but it's because
It's a long story.
it's very
Hmm.
long and it's very complicated as to how some of these events actually happened. But um, we were able to finally get to the apartment and break the door down. So this raid, the most important thing that this raid was is because we knew now about all these coletas and how sophisticated these hidden compartments were. So the main objective in this raid is we had to brief the Attorney General of Colombia, and we had to get, which was basically the equivalent of a no-knock search warrant in Colombia or in the U.S., where we would just be able to get up to the door and break the door down and get in. Because if we knocked on the door, which was usual, and waited for somebody to get to the door, Miguel would go into the compartment, they'd close it up, and we'd never find him. So the element of surprise and speed was the key to this raid. So we got special permission to break the door down. So once we got to the 10th floor apartment and we broke the door down, we knew, and we could talk about this in another question or later, but we pretty much knew at that point that was the apartment. We were 100% convinced based on other things that we had seen and that we knew. So we knocked the door down, we arrested Miguel, and as we were going into the master bedroom, I heard one of the equivalent of like a Navy commando said, I got him, I got him. And me and Jerry ran into the bedroom, and the Navy commander was holding Miguel by the shirt. He was getting into the Coletta, ready to close the door when this Navy commando grabbed him. And wow, we got in there quick too. We knocked the door down. I can only imagine if we got delayed. So to answer your question, when we first encountered Miguel, he went through three very distinct phases in very rapid succession. The first one was confusion, right? We hit his house at 4:30 in the morning. He was woken up out of his sleep. You know, people were running through his house. He didn't quite know what was going on. He just knew I needed to get into the compartment. There's a raid, and it was complete confusion. The second one, after about 5 minutes, was like pure rage. He was wrath. He was extremely pissed off. And I was the only identifiable American in the apartment. And I remember the Navy commando brought him and he put him right in front of me. And I looked into Miguel's eyes. He looked back at me, and he has like the worst, evilest 1,000-yard stare I have ever seen in my life. And, you know, again, as the only American, he was extremely pissed off. You could see it in his face and in his eyes. And then after 5 minutes, the third stage, he was resigned to the fact he was arrested. It sank in. He knew he was arrested, and there was nothing he could do about it. And it was sat there on the couch, handcuffed. You know, nothing he could do. So
when did you take the camera out and start taking pictures?
Pretty quick. I mean, pretty quick. We got well, first we had to wait because Dave's job was he was on top of the mountain, like looking, you know, providing an overwatch and, you know, watching the inside of the apartment to see if there was any movement or light. So it took him a while to get to the apartment after we arrested Miguel. Ruben got hung up on the mountain coming down, so he wasn't there when we initially grabbed him. So once those two kind of got to the apartment, then we got behind Miguel. We took our pictures, our trophy shots, so to say, with him. We, you know, took a lot of photos of the apartment. We took a lot of photos of the hidden compartment, the Coletta, you know, with the drawers out, with the drawers in, the door, like everything. And so yeah, and then, you know, of course, we found another smattering of documents inside the inside the Coletta.
Did you plan to pose with him before the raid, or was it like just spur of the moment?
No, because this is the other thing. It was very hard to like take any kind of photos when we were in Cali. I mean, the prosecutors wouldn't allow us to do stuff. Sometimes they wouldn't let us go on raids. You know, anytime we had to take a photo, we kind of had to sneak it. So it was very hard to do that. So, you know, once Miguel got arrested and handcuffed and he was put on the couch, the prosecutor, this is a whole funny story too. We get into it. She fell coming down the mountain, and she didn't get there for a while. Ruben didn't get there for a while. A lot of people didn't get there initially. We hit the door. There were only 6 or 7 of us when we hit the door. So we figured there's nobody around here right now. We could take as many photos as we want. So we just started snapping photos before, before a lot of them got there. And then, once everybody saw Miguel, and it kind of turned into a pretty, a euphoric atmosphere. And then I don't think anybody really cared at that point whether we were taking photos or not. So we were able to get him on that raid. But a lot of the other ones, it was tough.
Now, Miguel was kind enough not to flip the bird at the camera when he was taking pictures.
Yeah, he did. He sat there with his nasty scowl on his face, and that was it.
Yeah. Do you have that picture framed in your house anywhere? You
I
should. Yeah.
Surprisingly, I have absolutely nothing in my house that indicates anything about DEA or anything. I mean, I have it in boxes in my garage, but I
Yeah.
mean, I have photos and stuff because for different podcasts or for Narcos and stuff, I'm continually like, taking photos out and sending them, but I don't have anything actually posted on walls or anywhere. I have them in a
Yeah.
box here in one of the drawers.
Yeah. I think Steve Murphy has that picture framed with him with Pablo Escobar on the roof somewhere. Like I heard about that story.
Steve's house is like a museum. He's got photos and posters of everything. So
Yeah. All right, nice. You got another question, Ian?
Um, I mean, give or take, I mean, this must have been one of the most gripping periods of your life. I mean, you were right in the middle of the action. Do you feel nostalgia a lot for those days?
mm, define nostalgia.
Would you do you miss the action? Do you miss the being a DEA agent?
Uh, that's the two-part question, and the answer is yes and no. Being in Colombia the first time when I was there from 94 to 97, that was probably the best time of my life working as an agent. Just because of what we discussed, being in Cali, being on our own, living in safe houses, doing, you know, being 200 miles away from the embassy, right? No one looking over your shoulder, which I guess is good and bad. It was good that we had the freedom to do what we did, but it was bad if the shit really hit the fan, right?
Mm.
But just being able to, at that point in time, that's what you sign up for, right? You want to be in the field, you want to be running around, you want to be working on these very high level cases. So being able to do that without a lot of supervision and being on our own at that level, that was great. That was the best time of my life. Um, Later on, being a DEA agent, being back in the States or being with all the bureaucracy in Washington and stuff. I mean, I don't miss that. I don't still never would miss that in my life. So different periods of time, different positions, being a field agent, being a supervisor, manager. Um, yeah, I miss running around, but I don't miss the office work.
Do you ever meet up with Jerry or Dave and like reminisce on the old days, in a bar or restaurant somewhere?
Sometimes we get together and we'll have a few beers, and then something prompts uh, us to reflect back on that time, and then we'll go back. And one of the things that I talk about, this is I don't know if you think of funny, but this is probably one of the funniest stories that I could think of. With Dave, and every time we get together, we talk about it. Is um, We talked about after the first raid, the failed raid, we went back to Bogota, and then once we had enough information, we went back to Cali, which is the day, when we met Salcedo in the cane field, we had to bribe our way out. So during that time, Salcedo told us the information that we had was that there were two buildings, and he could have been in one of the two buildings. And he gave us a point in this park. It was an elevated park where we had a perfectly like a line of sight, unobstructed view of the two buildings, but we were probably at least a half a mile away. But we were able to see the building. So we would go there at night, at 11, 12 o'clock at night, and we would sit there and we would watch through binoculars through at the two buildings, trying to watch which lights turned out last. And Salcedo had given us a key piece of information that Miguel had swapped out his staff after the failed raid in Santa Rita. So he got rid of Furcho, who was his executive assistant. He got a new one, and he swapped out his domestic employees, and he got two new ones, two Afro-Colombian maids from Buenaventura. And one night, after about the third or fourth night of surveillance, I was looking through the binoculars, and that's what we would do to see if there were any lights or anything came on. And Dave had just ordered these like super spy official KGB James Bond binoculars from this Soldier of Fortune or some spy magazine, right? And he was like so proud of these binoculars. He goes, dude, look at how small these are. These are official KGB binoculars and this and that. And I paid, X amount for them. And these are going to be great on surveillance. Okay, whatever. So that night, we see a light come on. And so I put my DEA binoculars up, and I'm looking through the binoculars, and I'm looking. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I see through the binoculars these two Afro-Colombian maids working in the kitchen, like they're cooking or washing dishes or whatever. And that perfectly hit on the information that Salcedo said. So I'm like, dude, that has to be the apartment. What are the chances at 1 o'clock in the morning, the only light on in the building, that these maids are working? Go, that's the building. This is it. So Dave's like has his KGB super spy specs out, and he's looking. He's like, I can't see anything. Are you sure? I'm like, I'm positive. I'm looking through the binoculars. He's looking at his glasses like, I can't believe these things. I can't see anything. I look. So anyway, I'm watching him for like 5 minutes. I'm like, this is the place. We got to put our plan in motion. We got to set the date for the raid. He's like, let me see. So he looks through my binoculars. He sees them, but he can't see through his. So anyway, we wait for, he's all pissed off. He's looking at him. And I said, Dave, well, what do you expect? They're Russian binoculars. You got them in a cereal box, whatever. So before we leave, I said, hey, let me see your binoculars for a minute. So he gives them to me, and I took them, and I was as hard as I could. I took them and I threw them down the hill from where we were sitting, and you could hear him like rolling down the hill. And he's like, hey, my KGB binoculars. I'm like, Dave, it's where they belong. They're a piece of crap. And just his reaction, like he had just lost his puppy, like these were his prized glasses. It just made it so much funnier. And me and Jerry were just doubled over laughing for literally like 5 or 10 minutes. And there went Dave's like, super spy specs lost forever in the abyss.
That's a good story.
It really is.
Yeah.
I feel bad asking this next question. I feel like it's gonna dampen the mood, but yeah, since we were talking about your post DEA days, there was one good question from a viewer who asked, after taking down one of the most notorious drug cartels in the world, have you experienced any terror in your life because of your team's accomplishments?
It's a good question. About 3 months after we took down Miguel, so this would have been in about November, I got some pretty serious death threats in my apartment in Bogota on my home phone. Go figure, right? In my apartment. And it was a total of 4 calls, and they were pretty nasty, pretty direct, basically saying that we know where you live. When you leave your apartment, you're going to die. We'll get you, death to gringos, so on and so forth. So based on everything that had happened, that caused some pretty immediate concern. I was moved to another apartment. They wanted to evacuate me out of the country. Thank God we were able to, let the investigation by the embassy, the RSO, the regional security office play out. And, they were able to determine that it didn't reference me by name, didn't reference the fact that I worked for DEA. So we were able to spin that to say, like, look, it's whatever we were able to say. We were able to get away with it. And so I was able to stay in country, but that was pretty unnerving. Dave had 3 people come to visit his apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning, shortly thereafter, asking for him by name, asking him to come outside, which of course he didn't. So he had to be moved to another apartment. We had to vary our date or routes to the embassy. We couldn't travel. We had security details with us. Salcedo had wrote something that said that he thought he was only looking out for us, but of course, knee-jerk reaction that he said the cartel knew our identities, our participation in the raids, and interestingly enough, and I won't comment too much on this, is that the night that we extracted Palomari out of Cali, Cesar Yusti was shot and killed, and Salcedo thought that we had done it, and he figured that the cartel um, thought that we may have been involved in that too. So there were potential retaliations by the cartel against us for that. But the threats, the late night visits, the surveillances, very overt surveillances following us, not only in Cali but in Bogota from our houses. Yeah, that was pretty stuff that we always had to be careful of.
Who do you
Would this,
think killed Cesar Yusti? That was a bit open-ended.
yeah.
That's a good question. I
By the
always
way, it's the
thought that,
inspiration for Navigante in Narcos,
yes,
for the
Yes,
viewers.
sorry, right.
I had always thought that it was Salcedo was you know, he was relieved of his duties as head of security by the Cali cartel either that day or the day before. So he was pretty much in lockdown. So I don't think he was involved in it. I think it's very possible that he had one of his, or not had, that one of his security associates, maybe Enrique Sanchez or somebody else, was able to kill him. But nobody really knew where Yusti was going to be at. So it's kind of strange. I don't know. The case has never been solved. There's never been any evidence to implicate anybody in it. So if I had to
Yeah.
guess, I would have said Enrique Sanchez, but I have absolutely no evidence to support that, or one of the other security staff that was loyal to Salcedo.
Okay.
Okay.
Got another question, Ian?
Do you want to move on to some of the questions from our live viewers now?
I think that would be a good opportunity. Yeah. Do you have the chat pulled up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that popped out to you?
Let's have a look. Okay. Here's your opportunity, guys.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay, so
Any questions from our live viewers? I'm
yeah,
scrolling.
I got one thing. How much did you age during those days? Different.
Probably quite a bit.
Yeah.
Anytime you were in Cali, you were always looking over your shoulder. It was like you had this huge weight that was on top of you, always looking for surveillance. We were always worried about the cartel would find us in our safe house when we were sleeping. Even though we, you know, surmised that they probably wouldn't take any hostile action against us to try to kidnap or kill us, that was always in the back of your mind. So uh, it made for a lot of sleepless nights. We were continually out at all hours of the morning, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, doing surveillance, meeting with Salcedo, doing operations. We didn't get a lot of sleep. So yeah, it took its toll on us.
Yeah. Did
Okay.
you ever interrogate any of the Cali Godfathers after they were arrested?
I talked to Miguel briefly when we arrested him. When the Navy commando brought him in front of me, I told him, in Spanish, I said, "Se acabó, señor, se acabó." Like it's over. It's over. Um, he made a few comments that he never thought he would get caught. That his security was better than ours, which wasn't the case. But other than a few questions here or there, briefly, no, because it was such a chaotic scene. Anytime one of those guys was arrested, it was hard to get near him. And plus, we didn't want to be near him. We didn't want to show up in any kind of photos or on the news. I mean, per the ambassador, we weren't even supposed to be participating in raids. So we we kind of stayed away and in the background as much as we could.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
See what else. A lot of these questions are kind of stuff that we've already you've already answered. I'm saying here. Ian, can
Yeah.
you think, do you find one?
I think there was, yeah, there was one relating to a question that's already been asked, which is, I think they portray in Narcos, they portray arriving DEA agents in well in Narcos Mexico after Kiki Camarena death, but also in Narcos Colombia. They kind of portray your sense of invisibility, like you have an immunity card since the death of Kiki Camarena. To what extent was that really the case?
Yeah, we're like DA agents like fair game, or were they sort of were they not?
Well, as it pertains to Cali, um, remember, Cali operated much differently than Medellin. Um, they were the gentlemen of Cali. They were, the godfathers of Cali. They portrayed themselves as businessmen, bankers. They owned all these radio stations. So they never wanted to portray or have that insinuation that they were violent. Um, the last thing that they wanted to do was to intentionally, and key word here being intentionally harm a DEA agent, because what Cali feared, whether it was right or wrong, more than anything was what happened in Panama in 1989 with the invasion to get Noriega. They always, in the back of their minds thought that that was a possibility if a DEA agent or somebody was hurt or killed. So they tried to stay away from that. And through our assets, we kind of knew that that was like an unwritten rule not to intentionally cause harm to a DEA agent. But, remember there's, you know, wrong place, wrong time. Something happens. It was always a possibility. It was always in the back of our mind. Uh, although I never really thought that it would happen, but you had to be prepared for it. You were always thinking about it though. So, but I wouldn't say it was an invincibility thing. It was just more of how they operated, that we knew they would most likely not do that. But once they were arrested, though, remember that's when all the threats started. You got the
Mm,
phone calls, the visits to the house. It was kind of, you had a new sheriff in town. William
mm.
was running the cartel. They were more desperate. I would say if there was any chance, it might have been then, but um, it was
Do you
their
think
general practice, though, to shy away from it.
do you think it's likely that that William would have been responsible for the threats?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think so. I
William
wouldn't.
Rodriguez, yeah, that's who you
Yeah,
asked.
I
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say him. No,
yeah.
no.
Okay. But he did I think offer a US citizen 2 million US for the location of Salcedo, of his safe house in the US under witness protection. So he was
Yeah,
definitely out to get him.
I've heard that. Yeah, definitely heard that before. But here was the other thing too, going about back to the threat thing. Um, the Cali cartel, they knew that, well, they assumed and they knew, I guess, that, you know, American agents, DEA, we couldn't conduct like a unilateral raid. So it wasn't like we were going to have Delta Force coming down there and kicking in the door to arrest them. That would have, that would obviously be illegal and violate so many different things. So they knew that we had to rely on the Colombian security forces in order to launch any kind of enforcement operation. So that's where all of their safeguards went into: the corruption of the Colombian security forces, the wiretapping, the surveillances, the taxis. So they weren't worried as much about us doing something because they knew we needed the Colombians to do it. However, what they were terrified of were our informants, were our assets.
Yeah.
And that's why we were followed a lot of times in hopes that we would lead them to our informants. And they were fair game. They would definitely go after them and they would definitely kill them. And they did. So that's why a lot of times we were followed. But it wasn't that we were such a risk to them. They knew we had to rely on the Colombians for that.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose if somebody in the cartel was talking to you, yeah, they were fair game, whereas you guys were just doing your jobs, right?
Right. And again, to launch that operation, they knew we needed the Colombians to do that, and they had that covered as far as the best they could with the corruption and their wiretap and their surveillances and stuff like that.
Mm. Yeah. Okay.
I've got another question. Did you you see? I know you met Javier Pena, but did you meet Steve Murphy too in Colombia, or was this after?
No, I met Steve actually. We worked together in Miami.
Oh
We were
wow.
both in Miami for, I think Steve went to Colombia in like 91,
Yeah.
early to mid 91. So by that time, we'd probably worked, we weren't in the same group or anything, but we were both in the same field division. We ran into each other. So me and Dave knew him. We were there probably for about 3 years together in Miami.
Yeah. He came over with his wife, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But did you come by yourself, or did you have a partner too?
No, I was there myself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's see. I got another question was, were there any lessons that you learned during a time with the DEA that you may still use to this day? I'm imagining stuff like knowing when people are lying to you or something like that.
Well, I mean, always be aware of your surroundings. So, no matter where I go, you're always, and that's from working in Cali, I guess, all those years, is that, even you come into your house, you go into a restaurant, you're always looking in the parking lot, you're always looking down the street, you're always looking to see if there's anybody following you. Um,
Yeah. You still use
I
that to this
always,
day?
yes, all the time. It's just ingrained. I mean, I can't,
Yeah.
you can't, you can't help it. I mean,
Yeah. Did they
it's,
train you to do that, or did you learn it yourself by being in Cali?
well, I mean, they train you, or you go through training as I guess as best you can for certain things like that. But when you're working in a hostile environment like that, I mean, you have to take precautions. If you don't, then you're very, open or subject yourself to something bad to happen. So, um, we would continually, doing surveillance detection rounds, trying to, you know,
Yeah.
design to determine if somebody's following you. We would only go and eat at certain restaurants at certain times because we knew that they weren't crowded. Um, so, you see suspicious people, you see, I don't know, just in general, because of everything, you're suspicious of everything, no matter who you
Yeah.
see on the street or, you deem them suspicious until you can determine otherwise.
Yeah. I've got another question from the chat. What does it take to dismantle a modern day cartel? Like, have they evolved, and how would today's technology play in compared to back in your day?
Well, I mean, cartels can't exist without corruption, right? So it's one of the reasons why you never see like a major cartel here in the United States, right? Because you identify them and you can take them down before they get to be that big for the most part. A lot of the drug cartels in Mexico are very insulated with corruption. Colombia's or Mexico's a much larger country. There's more area. It's harder to get to them, but um, I always had a saying that, finding out where these guys are at or knowing where these guys are at is not easy, but it's fairly easy. Launching any kind of operation to actually arrest them, that's when it gets difficult because of corruption and other things. So yeah, I think if we can curtail corruption, I think if we were in Mexico, if you're allowed to be more active, DEA was able to do more things, I think we would be able to better attack some of these cartels.
Yeah. Well, the cartel you went after is very unique. It was like the most powerful cartel in history, basically, for those few short years. I imagine like the modern day cartels are more splintered. Like they don't have as much. They don't bring in as much money as Cali did.
Well, I mean, there's more of them. I think they bring in a lot of money, but with technology though, it's much harder to get to them. I mean, these guys are all talking on encrypted phones, on encrypted apps. They're using Bitcoin. Technology is our enemy when it comes uh, to attacking those cartels because they're using all these encrypted, communications, and it's very hard for us to go after them, to intercept them, and it just makes law enforcement much more difficult now. And again, especially in countries like Mexico where the corruption is, it's very difficult to go after them. But you saw some successes recently with Ismael Zambada being arrested. But you see how that happened, though, right? It's the same way that the only way that you can get to a lot of these main traffickers is by the use of, or I'm assuming by the use of informants, or is human assets trying to get intel, just like what we did with Salcedo, just like we did with a lot of these with Gilberto, a lot of these kingpins. Is these guys are, again, like you said, talking on encrypted phones. It's hard to intercept them. You're not going to be able to get them by technology. Most of the time, these guys are arrested by human sources.
Okay. We
Very
got. Sorry. You
sorry.
go ahead, Ian.
Um, very briefly, could you tell us a little bit about the drug scene in Colombia after the fall of the Cali cartel? The North Valley cartel fills the void. What happens after that? So between then and the modern day.
So with the North Valley cartel, you had a completely different animal with that cartel because shortly thereafter, the Colombian government passed extradition, which meant that Colombian nationals were now eligible for extradition for crimes committed after December 17th, 1997. So the North Valley cartel, as much as they were not very book smart, they were extremely street smart. And what they started to do was they started sending all of their cocaine directly to Mexico, completely circumventing sending cocaine to the United States. So in their mind, they weren't sending cocaine to the US, so they weren't breaking any US laws. So they just continued to pound Mexico and the Mexican cartels with cocaine. And what that did, it was twofold. It made investigating the North Valley cartel much more difficult because we weren't having those US investigations. And secondly, it made the ascension of the Mexican cartels much more dramatic, and they became much more powerful. So you started to see a shift from Colombia, the North Valley cartel. A lot of the power and everything started to go to Mexico, where it was already in Mexico. And then you had kind of the explosion of the Mexican cartels, which was one of probably the biggest difference, because Colombians now were sending everything directly to Mexico, supplying the Mexican cartels, and they weren't sending stuff to the U.S. And that's where we are at now. I mean, the biggest threat we have now are from the Mexican cartels.
So now, I mean, there are still, of course, cartels active in Colombia, but they're much more scattered.
They're more scattered. A lot of it's controlled by by the FARC or remnants of the left-wing guerrilla groups. You have splinter groups of the right-wing AUC or the paramilitary groups that are involved in cocaine trafficking. But again, most of them are sending stuff directly to Mexico.
Yeah.
Maybe not as much money, but certainly much less risk.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
See any other good questions, Ian, from the chat?
Haven't been the imminent.
There's one person asking what are your thoughts about El Mayo being arrested recently, but he's a cartel member from Mexico.
Is it going to have a lot of impact on what's going on as far as drugs
Oh, did
coming
you find
into
it
the
interesting,
U.S.?
basically?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
probably not. It's not going to have any. However, I think what's going to happen is, uh, I think as time goes on, you're going to start to see, which I'm not privy to, the details about how he was arrested and what led to that. And I think that you're going to see um, some major cartel wars going on in Mexico between different cartels because I think the assumption is that he was either set up or lured into the U.S. So I think things are about to get interesting in Mexico.
Yeah. That's scary. Ian, do you have any final questions or thoughts you want to ask Chris?
Um, on my end, I think I'm okay. We've been
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
2 hours. We've done very well.
Yeah. That was a good live stream, that.
It really
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're good to end it. That was a good 2 hours of content. Hopefully, the audience learned something new that they didn't pick up in the review. So remember to check out Ian with Humans of History on his channel. And one more
You haven't
time,
heard of it? I don't blame you.
yeah. No, no, no. They should absolutely check it out. I mean, that's how I found you in the first place with your stuff about Mexico. So I really appreciated you helping us out with Narcos season 3.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and Chris, you've got your book that you're writing. You still planning to publish it next year?
Well, hopefully it'll be out next year. We have a tentative working title. It's called After Escobar, taking down the notorious Cali Godfathers and the biggest drug cartel in history. So hopefully that will be out sometime next year, probably mid next year. Production and editing takes a very long time, so not quite sure on the time frame, but hopefully we can get that out as soon as possible. And just thanks for having me on today. It's didn't seem like 2 hours went by.
Yeah, no,
There's the problem anytime we do these kind of things is there's so many questions left unanswered, and there's just so much information. It's very difficult to get to in one setting. But
yeah.
thanks for having me on, and I'm more than happy to come back anytime to help you guys out.
No, thanks very much. It was fun having you on. You're a really good storyteller.
No, thank
But
you. I appreciate it.
okay. All right. Well, that's it, everybody. Thanks for listening to this, rare live stream. We don't usually do them, but I thought would be perfect opportunity to do it. So, all right. Take care, everyone. All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. So long.